Hello everyone, welcome to the Great IAS. Today we begin one of the most important foundation topics of Indian polity historical background of the Indian Constitution, straight from M. Laxmikanth, with full focus on UPSC prelims and mains.
It is fantastic to be here. And frankly, you couldn't have picked a better place to start.
Right.
I know whenever we say historical background, you can almost hear half the room start to tune out. They think it's just a laundry list of dates and dusty old acts.
It's a bit of a history lesson that feels disconnected.
Exactly. But we need to reframe that mindset right now because it's not disconnected at all.
Absolutely, because if you're trying to understand the Indian Constitution without this backstory, it's like trying to watch the season finale of a show without seeing any of the previous seasons.
That's a perfect analogy. You might get the gist, but you'll miss all the nuance, all the character development.
All the inside jokes.
Precisely. Our Constitution, which came into effect in 1950, it didn't just appear out of a vacuum. It wasn't some sudden revelation. It was built brick by brick on the foundation of the British Raj. So many of the systems we use today, the civil service, our parliamentary procedures, the federal structure, even the role of the governor, they all have their roots right here in these specific acts we're going to cover.
So the mission for this deep dive is to trace that evolution. We're going all the way from the East India Company's, early rule in 1773, right up to the Indian Independence Act of 1947.
And we're going to decode that whole alphabet soup of regulations, the regulating acts, charter acts, council acts.
It can get very confusing.
It can. But more importantly, we're going to look at the why behind the what. Why did the British Parliament suddenly decide to interfere with a private trading company? Why, down the line, did they introduce things like communal electorates? We need to understand the strategy, not just memorize the statute.
Tone set. Let's dive in.
Okay.
We're starting in the late 18th century. The East India Company is, for all intents and purposes, this massive corporate monster in India.
Oh, absolutely.
They're fighting wars, they're collecting taxes, they're making money hand over fist. But back in London, the British government isn't exactly cheering them on, are they?
Not at all. In fact, the British Parliament was furious. You had this really strange paradox.
Which was?
The East India Company, as a corporation, was actually facing bankruptcy. They were literally asking the British government for a loan, but
the employees were coming back rich.
Fabulously rich. The company's servants were returning to England as millionaires. They were called nabobs, which is, a corruption of the Indian word nawab.
And they were flaunting it.
Oh, they were flashing their wealth, buying up estates, buying seats in Parliament. And the British elite were, they were both jealous and deeply suspicious.
So the company is broke, but the employees are rich. That just screams corruption.
It screams gross mismanagement and systemic corruption. And that situation, it basically forced the British Parliament to say, okay, we have to step in, we need to regulate this.
Which leads us to the first major milestone, the Regulating Act of 1773.
The first one.
Okay, let's unpack this. The name regulating seems pretty self-explanatory. This is the leash.
This is the first leash, yes. And it's of great constitutional importance because it was the first time the British Parliament officially acknowledged that the company wasn't just a merchant trading spices anymore.
They were more than that.
They had political and administrative functions. They were, in effect, running a government.
And to run a government, you need a clear leader. Before this, you had governors in Bengal, Bombay, and Madras, and they were all kind of doing their own thing, weren't they?
Exactly. There were like 3 separate fiefdoms, all reporting back to London independently. But this act introduced the concept of, centralization.
Oh, so.
It took the governor of Bengal and elevated him. He became the governor general of Bengal.
And for the aspirants scribbling notes, the first man to sit in that chair was Lord Warren Hastings.
Correct. But here's the catch. They didn't want to make him a dictator. So they created an executive council of 4 members to assist him.
To keep him in check.
To keep him in check. Decisions were to be made by majority vote.
Which, if I recall my history, caused Hastings no end of headaches. His council members were constantly outvoting him.
It was a logistical nightmare for him, yes. But structurally, the really big move was making the governors of Bombay and Madras subordinate to the governor general of Bengal.
So no more independent fiefdoms.
No. Before 1773, they were equals. Now, Bengal is the boss. This is the very first seed of a centralized Indian administration being planted.
The act also tried to fix the legal system, right? It established a Supreme Court.
Yes. In 1774, a Supreme Court was established in Calcutta. It had 1 Chief Justice and 3 other judges.
That sounds good on paper, But didn't it lead to a massive turf war?
Oh, absolutely. A complete mess. The act was very vague. It didn't clearly define the Supreme Court's jurisdiction.
So who was under its authority?
Nobody really knew. Was the governor general subject to it? Were the company's tax collectors subject to it? You had the Supreme Court issuing warrants against company officials, and you had the governor general protecting them. It was total chaos.
And what about accountability back in London?
That was the final pillar of the 1773 Act. The Court of Directors, which was the governing body of the company, was now required to report on all revenue, civil, and military affairs directly to the British government.
So no more hiding the books.
The company could no longer hide its books. The leash was getting tighter.
But because of that chaos you mentioned, between the court and the governor general, they had to patch things up pretty quickly.
They had to. Which brings us to the Act of Settlement of 1781.
A patch, you said.
You can think of this as a bug fix update. It's often called the Declaratory Act. Its main purpose was just to stop the Supreme Court from paralyzing the government.
And how did it do that?
It simply exempted the Governor General and his council from the jurisdiction of the Supreme Court for any acts they did in their official capacity. It basically said, look, judges, let the government govern. Stop interfering in every single decision.
Okay, so bug fixed. But the British government still felt the company had too much autonomy. They wanted an even tighter grip. This brings us to a massive piece of legislation. Pitt's India Act of 1784.
This is crucial. If 1773 was a leash, 1784 was a partition. It introduced the famous system of double government.
Double government. Okay, that sounds like a classic exam question trap. What exactly was being doubled here?
It created a distinction. It separated the commercial functions of the company from its political functions.
Right.
So the court of directors, the old company guys, they were told, you stick to trade, manage the commercial affairs, the shipping, the profits.
On the other half.
For the political affairs, civil, military, revenue, they created a brand new body called the Board of Control.
And who sat on this Board of Control? Not company men, I assume.
No, British government appointees. This is the key. The Board of Control was empowered to supervise and direct all operations of the civil and military government. So, effectively, the British government in London now had supreme control over the company's administration in India.
So the Governor General in India is now serving two masters, in a way.
In a way, but the Board of Control definitely held the whip hand when it came to policy. It really reduced the company to a subordinate administrative arm of the British state in India.
Okay, moving forward, we enter the era of the Charter Acts. These seem to come like clockwork every 20 years. Let's briefly touch on the Charter Act of 1793.
It's a smaller stepping stone for sure. It extended the company's trade monopoly for another 20 years, but more importantly, it clarified a key legal point.
Which was?
That the sovereignty over the territories in India belonged to the Crown. The company was just holding the territory on behalf of the Crown.
And the source mentioned something about privileged trade here.
Yes, this is an interesting economic detail. The company started granting licenses to individuals, even its own employees, to carry out trade. This was called country trade, or privilege trade.
And this was significant because...
This mechanism was what largely facilitated the opium shipments to China. It's a very dark chapter of history, but that's how the logistics were handled through the system.
Right. Now let's jump 20 years to the Charter Act of 1813. The world has changed a lot by then. Napoleon is rampaging through Europe.
And he's blocked British goods from entering European ports, the continental system.
So British merchants are desperate for new markets.
Context is everything. Because of that pressure from merchants back home who wanted a piece of the Indian pie, the Charter Act of 1813 finally abolished the trade monopoly of the East India Company.
So the floodgates were opened?
Mostly. The company lost its monopoly on general trade, so any British merchant could now trade with India. But they were allowed to keep their monopoly on two very lucrative things.
Let me guess. Tea and China.
Tea and trade with China. Those were the real cash cows, so the company didn't go broke immediately.
1813 is also famous for a big cultural shift. This is when the missionaries were officially allowed in.
Yes, it permitted Christian missionaries to come to India for the purpose of, as they put it, enlightening the people. It really marks the beginning of Western education and cultural intervention on a much larger scale.
And one more thing, a bit of bookkeeping.
Right. It required the company to keep its commercial accounts totally separate from its territorial revenue accounts. More transparency.
Which brings us to the next 20-year mark, and arguably one of the biggest turning points in this entire timeline, the Charter Act of 1833.
This is a big one. If you're making a graph of centralization in British India, 1833 is the highest peak. This act took the Governor-General of Bengal and rebranded him.
He became the Governor-General of India.
Exactly. That is a huge statement. It's not just about a region anymore. It's about the whole subcontinent under British control.
And the first person with that specific title was Lord William Bentinck.
Correct. And the act gave him immense power. He was vested with all civil and military powers.
And what happened to our friends, the governors in Bombay and Madras?
They were stripped. The act deprived the governors of Bombay and Madras of their legislative powers entirely. They basically became glorified administrators carrying out orders from the center.
So this is total centralization. One man, one council, deciding the law for the whole land.
Total centralization. And speaking of law, there's a linguistic shift here too, a small but important detail.
What's that?
Before 1833, laws were called regulations. After 1833, they were called acts. It implies they are formal statutes of a sovereign government, not just internal company rules.
And the company itself, what is their status now? Is it still a trading company?
The merchant mask falls off completely. The act ended all activities of the East India Company as a commercial body. It became a purely administrative body.
So they're not traders anymore.
They are bureaucrats. They are administrators holding the land in trust for His Majesty the King.
So from selling spices to ruling an empire, the transition is now legally complete.
It is.
Now we have one more Charter Act before everything blows up in 1857, the Charter Act of 1853.
This one is really special for two reasons: the civil service and the legislature.
Okay, let's start with the civil service. For a long time, if you wanted a cushy job in the company, the covenant of civil service, you needed connections. It was all about patronage.
It was an old boys' club. But the 1853 Act introduced an open competition system for selection and recruitment.
And crucially,
It was open to Indians as well. This was, at least in theory, a massive breakthrough, the idea of meritocracy over patronage. And the Macaulay Committee was appointed in 1854 to figure out how to actually implement this.
and structurally, this act did something really interesting with the Governor-General's Council.
It did. It finally recognized that making laws and enforcing laws are two different jobs. So, for the very first time, it separated the legislative and executive functions of the Governor-General's Council.
So they created a separate group just for lawmaking.
Yes. They added 6 new members called legislative counselors. This created a new, separate wing known as the Indian or Central Legislative Council.
Which sounds a lot like a parliament.
It functioned exactly like a mini-parliament. It adopted the same procedures as the British Parliament back in London. And here's a great nugget for the exam. Of those 6 new legislative members, 4 were appointed by the local or provincial governments of Madras, Bombay, Bengal, and Agra.
Local representation. The first hint of it.
In a very nascent form, yes. It was a tiny admission that you can't rule a place as vast as India without some input from the different regions.
So 1853 sets up all this new machinery. But the political reality on the ground was, well, it was rotting underneath. You have this huge disconnect between the rulers and the ruled.
A chasm.
And in 1857, the dam breaks. The Sepoy Mutiny, the Great Revolt. We don't need to cover the war itself,
Right.
but we absolutely need to cover the consequence.
The consequence was immediate, and it was drastic. The British government realized that a trading company, no matter how administrative it pretended to be, was not equipped to rule India. The trust was gone. The old system was broken,
Enter the Government of India Act of 1858,
which was ironically titled the Act for the Good Government of India.
a classic bit of political PR.
Indeed. The headline here is simple: Crown Rule. The East India Company was abolished, lock, stock, and barrel. All of its powers, territories, and revenues were transferred directly to the British Crown.
So Queen Victoria is now the Empress of India. How did that change the leadership structure?
Well, first, that double government system, or the Board of Control and the Court of Directors, that was scrapped. Done.
Replaced by?
Replaced by a new office created in London, the Secretary of State for India.
And this wasn't just some bureaucrat. This was a political heavy hitter, right?
Yes, the Secretary of State was a member of the British cabinet. That means he was directly answerable to the British Parliament. He was vested with complete authority and control over the Indian administration.
And he had help.
He did. They gave him a 15-member advisory body called the Council of India.
So that's the setup in London. What about in Calcutta? What happens to the Governor General?
He gets a title upgrade. He is now the viceroy.
Viceroy, which means in place of the king.
Exactly. He is the direct personal representative of the British Crown in India, and Lord Canning, who was the Governor-General during the revolt, became the first viceroy.
So the chain of command is now crystal clear. Parliament in London controls the Secretary of State, who controls the Viceroy in India, who controls the entire Indian administration.
Clear, direct, and completely under British sovereign control. The company is out of the picture for good.
But the British aren't stupid. They realized that 1857 happened partly because they had zero clue what was actually going on in the minds of Indians.
They were ruling in a vacuum.
Right. So they needed to associate Indians with the administration to prevent another blow-up. This begins the so-called policy of association, leading to the Council Acts. First up, the Indian Councils Act of 1861.
This act is a real pivot point. Remember 1833? How that was the peak of centralization where Bombay and Madras lost all their legislative powers.
Right. Total control from the center.
Well, 1861 reverses that. It initiated the process of decentralization. It restored the legislative powers to the Bombay and Madras presidencies.
So the pendulum swings back.
It had to. India was just too big and diverse to be run entirely from Calcutta. But the other huge feature of 1861 is the inclusion of Indians in the Legislative Council.
But they weren't elected, right? It wasn't a democracy.
Oh, no, absolutely not elected. They were nominated. The Viceroy, Lord Canning, nominated 3 Indians to his Legislative Council as non-official members.
And who are these first chosen ones?
The Raja of Benares, the Maharaja of Patiala, and Sir Dinkar Rao.
So aristocrats, loyalists.
Very safe choices. But still, for the first time, there were Indians in the room where laws were being made. It was a start.
1861 also formalized something we use every single day in modern government, the portfolio system.
Yes. This was introduced by Lord Canning. You can think of it as the birth of the cabinet system in India.
How did it work?
Before this, the council functioned as a group for every single issue. Now, a specific member of the council was made in charge of a specific department: home, military, law, finance, and could issue final orders on behalf of the council for that department. It just creates efficiency.
And the viceroy got some emergency powers, too.
He did. The power to issue ordinances. In an emergency, the viceroy could issue a law without the council's agreement.
How long would it last?
It would last for 6 months. And if you look at our Constitution today, we still have ordinance-making powers.
It's amazing how sticky these colonial-era provisions are. Okay, let's skip forward 30 years. The Indian National Congress has been formed. There's a growing nationalist demand for more rights. The British respond with the Indian Councils Act of 1892.
This act is a bit subtle, but important. It increased the number of non-official members in the councils, both central and provincial, but the real shift was in how they were chosen.
How so?
It introduced a limited and indirect provision for the use of election to fill some of these seats.
But they didn't actually use the word election, did they?
No, they were allergic to that word at this point. They called it nomination on the recommendation of certain bodies. So district boards, universities, municipalities, zamindars, they could recommend names to the governor.
A backdoor election.
It was a backdoor election, exactly. A very small step towards representative government.
And did these councils get any more real power?
A little, a tiny bit. They were given the power to discuss the budget.
Just discuss it.
Just discuss it. They couldn't vote on it. They couldn't change a single penny, but they could talk about it. And they could ask questions to the executive. It was a training ground for parliamentary procedure, but not much more.
Incremental progress. But then the 20th century hits. The Swadeshi movement is raging, tensions are high, and the British decide to play a very, very dangerous game with the Indian Councils Act of 1909.
Also known as the Morley-Minto reforms.
Right.
And this is a critical moment. On the surface, it looks like a generous expansion of rights. The size of the Central Legislative Council was raised significantly, from 16 to 60 members. That's a big jump.
And for the very first time, an Indian actually enters the executive inner sanctum.
Yes. This was huge. Satyendra Prasad Sinha became the first Indian to join the Viceroy's Executive Council. He was appointed as the law member. That was a massive glass ceiling that was shattered.
But there's a but. A very big, very dangerous but in this act.
There is the introduction of the communal electorate.
Let's explain exactly why this matters so much. It sounds, on the surface, like just guaranteed representation for a minority, which some might see as fair.
It's not just representation, it's isolation. By creating a separate electorate, the act said that Muslim members were to be elected only by Muslim voters.
So what's the long-term effect of that?
You are telling a politician you don't need to appeal to the Hindu voter or the Sikh voter or anyone else. You only need to please your own community. It institutionalized communalism. It made religion the primary legal basis of political identity.
The source calls Lord Minto the father of the communal electorate.
And rightfully so. It was a masterstroke of the divide and rule policy. It legalized communalism and planted the political seeds that would decades later tragically lead to partition.
That is a very heavy legacy. Okay, moving on to 1919. World War I is over. Indians contributed massively to the war effort and expected some real concessions in return.
A real move towards self-government.
Instead, they got the Government of India Act of 1919, also known as the Montagu-Chelmsford Reforms.
And this act introduces a term that confuses every single student who studies it: diarchy.
Okay, let's break diarchy down. It sounds a bit like anarchy, but it's not.
Not anarchy, but definitely a double vision government. Diarchy comes from the Greek word diarch, meaning double rule. This system was applied to the provincial government.
Right, at the provincial level.
And they divided all the subjects of administration into two lists: transferred and reserved.
I always use the car analogy for this.
Go for it. It's a good one.
Okay, so imagine the provincial government is a car. The British governor gets to keep the steering wheel, the brakes, and the gas pedal. Those are the reserve subjects, things like law and order, finance, revenue, all the things that actually make the car go and stop.
The important stuff.
And the Indian ministers. They get to control the air conditioning, the radio, and maybe the window wipers. Those are the transferred subjects, things like health, education, local government.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Right.
Because the transferred subjects were administered by the governor with the aid of ministers who were responsible to the legislative council. So if the hospitals were bad, the Indian minister got the blame.
Right.
But the reserve subjects were administered by the governor and his executive council without being responsible to the legislature. So if the police were brutal or taxes were too high, the governor wasn't answerable to the Indian people.
So it's responsibility without power for the Indians, and power without responsibility for the British.
Exactly. The system was designed to fail. But to give credit where it's due, the 1919 Act did introduce bicameralism at the center for the first time.
An upper house and a lower house.
Right. A Council of State and a Legislative Assembly. And for the first time, direct elections were introduced for the majority of members in both houses.
But they also expanded that communal wedge, didn't they?
They doubled down on it. They extended separate electorates to Sikhs, to Indian Christians, to Anglo-Indians, and to Europeans. So now everyone gets their own little political silo.
And 1919 also set up some institutions that are still with us.
Yes, it provided for the establishment of a public service commission. The Central Public Service Commission was finally set up in 1926 to recruit civil servants. And it separated the provincial budgets from the central budget for the first time, giving provinces their own checkbook, so to speak.
Now, the 1919 Act was supposed to be reviewed after 10 years, but the British jumped the gun and sent a commission early, the Simon Commission in 1927.
That's right. Sir John Simon and 7 other members. Their job was to report on the condition of India under this new constitution and suggest further reforms.
And the immediate problem was?
It was an all-white commission, not a single Indian member. Imagine a jury being set up to decide your fate, but you aren't even allowed to have a single representative on it. It was seen as a profound national insult.
Which led to the Simon Go Back protests.
Exactly. It was boycotted by all parties. But they did produce a report in 1930. And in it, they recommended abolishing that clunky diarchy system in the provinces and establishing a federation of British India and the princely states.
While all this political drama is happening, there's another move on the communal chessboard. The Communal Award of 1932.
Yes. Ramsay MacDonald, who was the British Prime Minister, announced that he was extending separate electorates to the depressed classes, what we now call the scheduled castes.
And this is where Mahatma Gandhi drew the line.
He saw this as the final, fatal blow to Indian unity. He believed it would permanently segregate the depressed classes from the rest of the Hindu fold. So he began a fast unto death in Yeravada jail in Pune.
Which forced a compromise.
It did. The Pune Pact. The agreement was to drop the separate electorate for depressed classes, but in return, the number of seats reserved for them in the general electorate was increased significantly. It preserved the joint electorate system.
All of this, the Simon Report, the Roundtable Conferences, the Communal Award, it all culminated in the single largest, most complex act ever passed by the British Parliament, the Government of India Act of 1935.
This is the heavyweight champion. It is a massive, incredibly detailed document. And listeners, you need to pay close attention here because a huge chunk of our current Constitution is directly borrowed, sometimes word for word, from this act.
Let's break it down into three parts: the federal level, the provincial level, and the institutions it created. First up, the proposed All India Federation.
The Act proposed a federation consisting of the British India provinces and the princely states. And to make it work, it divided powers into three lists: a federal list, a provincial list, and a concurrent list.
Which is exactly what we have today in the 7th schedule of our Constitution.
Exactly the same structure.
Right.
Residuary powers were given to the viceroy. But here's the kicker. The federation never actually happened.
Why not?
The princely states refused to join. They were worried about giving up their autonomy to a federal center, so they opted out. That whole part of the act remained a dead letter.
Okay, part 2, provincial autonomy. This part actually worked.
Yes, this is the death of diarchy in the provinces. The 1935 Act abolished it and introduced provincial autonomy in its place. The provinces were no longer just delegates of the center, they were autonomous units of administration.
So, real responsible government at the state level.
Pretty much. The governor was now required to act with the advice of ministers who were responsible to the provincial legislature. It came into effect in 1937, and Congress formed governments in many provinces.
And what about diarchy at the center?
Curiously, the act tried to introduce diarchy at the federal level, splitting federal subjects into reserved and transferred. But since the federation never formed, that never became operational either.
And part 3, the institutions it created.
It established the Reserve Bank of India, the RBI, to control the currency and credit of the country. It provided for a federal court, which was the precursor to our Supreme Court. And it set up not just a federal public service commission, but also provincial public service commissions for recruitment.
And it extended the franchise, the right to vote.
It did. About 10% of the total population got the right to vote. It's still a long way from universal suffrage, but it was a significant expansion from the handful of elites who could vote before.
So 1935 lays the complete blueprint for a modern state. But history moves fast. World War II happens, the Quit India movement, the INA trials. By 1947, the British rule is effectively over. We reach the finale, the Indian Independence Act of 1947.
This is the exit strategy, the end of the empire. The act declared India to be an independent and sovereign state from August 15th, 1947.
Sovereignty, that's the magic word.
It means everything. It means the British Parliament no longer has any legislative authority over India. The act provided for the partition of India and the creation of two independent dominions, India and Pakistan.
What happens to the viceroy now?
The office of viceroy is abolished completely. Each dominion gets a governor general, but, and this is absolutely critical, he is now just a constitutional head, a nominal head.
So he can't overrule the government.
He acts only on the advice of the Council of Ministers. No more discretionary powers, no more vetoes. Lord Mountbatten became the first Governor General of the new Dominion of India, but he was essentially a figurehead.
And the title, Emperor of India.
That was dropped from the royal titles of the King of England, a final symbolic end to the era.
The act also gave full power to the constituent assemblies of the two new countries, right?
Full sovereign power. They could frame any constitution they wanted. They could even repeal any act of the British Parliament, including the Indian Independence Act itself, if they so chose.
And what about the hundreds of princely states? They were given a choice.
Yes. The British paramountcy over them lapsed. They were granted freedom to join the Dominion of India, join the Dominion of Pakistan, or to remain independent.
That remain independent clause caused a lot of trouble, as we know, but that's a story for another deep dive.
It certainly is.
And finally, until the new Constitution was written and adopted, how was the country governed?
They fell back on the Government of India Act of 1935. The 1947 Act said, in essence, use the 1935 rules as your interim constitution until you write your own.
Which just goes to show how robust and comprehensive that 1935 Act really was.
It was the skeleton on which the new Indian state was built. Absolutely.
Wow, what a trajectory. From 1773, where the British Parliament is just trying to stop a private company from going bankrupt, to 1858, where the Crown takes direct control, all the way to 1947, where they finally let go.
It is a remarkable and often painful evolution, and as we look back, it's easy to see these acts only as tools of colonial oppression, which of course they were, but they were also the crucible in which the modern Indian administrative and political state was forged. The legal system, the federal structure, the parliamentary procedure, We took these colonial tools and repurposed them for the world's largest democracy.
To quickly recap for our listeners, here are the exam nuggets you absolutely need to visualize on a timeline.
Go for it.
Okay. 1773, centralization begins. Governor General of Bengal. 1833, centralization peaks. Governor General of India. The company becomes purely administrative.
Right.
1858, the revolt changes everything. Crown rule begins. The Secretary of State enters the picture. 1861, decentralization begins. The portfolio system.
The pendulum swings back.
1909, the big one. Communal electorates, the wedge. 1919, diarchy in the provinces, the half measure.
Responsibility without power.
1935, provincial autonomy, the blueprint for our Constitution. And finally, 1947, sovereignty.
That is a perfect summary. And I just want to leave our listeners with one final thought, which comes from the source material itself. It's a quote from Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, the father of our Constitution. He once said, "We are Indians, firstly and lastly."
A very powerful reminder.
It is, because the British Acts we've just discussed spent nearly 200 years trying to categorize us by caste, by religion, by province, by community. The entire struggle for the Constitution, in a way, was a struggle to erase those hyphens and to forge an identity where we could just be Indian. When you study these acts, remember that you are studying the history of how we fought to define ourselves against that colonial framework.
That is where it gets really interesting. History isn't just about the past. It's about understanding who we are today. Visualize that timeline. Keep those concepts like diarchy clear. Remember the car analogy? And you will ace this section in prelims and mains.
Happy studying!
That is it for this deep dive into the historical background of the Indian Constitution. Thanks for listening to the Great IAS. See you next time.